Sauron's story begins long before his rise to power in Middle-earth. As one of the Maiar, divine spirits created by Eru Ilúvatar, Sauron originally served Aule the Smith, one of the Valar, the highest of the Ainur. Under Aule, Sauron learned the arts of craft and creation, becoming a master of design, structure, and order. It was this affinity for organization and precision that would later be twisted into his desire for control and domination. However, Sauron, then known as Mairon, began to seek more than just creation for the sake of beauty or utility. He grew obsessed with perfection and control over all things, a desire that led him into the service of Melkor, who later became known as Morgoth. Melkor had been the most powerful of the Valar, but his lust for dominion caused him to rebel against Eru Ilúvatar and seek to bend the world to his will. He saw in Mairon a kindred spirit, someone who valued order but could be swayed into using it for darker purposes. When Mairon joined Melkor, he did so not out of a love for chaos or destruction, but out of a belief that Morgoth's vision of power was the true path to achieving total control over the world. In Morgoth, Sauron saw a force strong enough to subjugate all of existence, to bring everything into a single, unified order under their rule. While many of Morgoth's servants were mere thralls or creatures of brute force, Sauron was different. He was intelligent, cunning, and highly skilled, making him indispensable to Morgoth's designs. Over time, Sauron became Morgoth's most trusted lieutenant, executing his master's will with ruthless efficiency. Sauron's devotion to Morgoth was not just a matter of subservience, it was a genuine belief in Morgoth's cause. He saw himself as an agent of a greater power, and in Morgoth's rebellion, Sauron found his own ambitions magnified. To Sauron, the world was imperfect and chaotic, and Morgoth's vision of domination seemed like the only way to impose true order. Thus, Sauron was not merely a servant, he was a disciple of Morgoth's dark ideology. As the first age of Middle-earth unfolded, Sauron played a key role in Morgoth's war against the Valar and the Elves. He led armies, created fortresses, and became feared across Middle-earth. Yet despite his growing power, Sauron always remained in Morgoth's shadow. He served his master without question, for Morgoth was the ultimate embodiment of the power Sauron sought. Together, they wreaked havoc upon the world, causing the destruction of many of the free peoples of Middle-earth. But Sauron's fate would take a sharp turn at the end of the First Age. After centuries of conflict, the Valar finally intervened to stop Morgoth. In the War of Wrath, Morgoth was defeated, captured, and cast into the void, a timeless prison beyond the confines of the world. With Morgoth's fall, Sauron found himself without his master for the first time in millennia. His mentor and guide, the source of his ambition and power, was gone, and Sauron now had to decide his next course of action. After the defeat of Morgoth, Sauron fled into hiding. He was offered a chance to repent by the Valar, but his pride and ambition were too great. While Sauron had once served Morgoth out of loyalty and shared purpose, now he was left to his own devices. Without Morgoth, Sauron was faced with a crucial decision. Should he continue to serve the will of his former master, or should he pursue his own path of power? In the aftermath of Morgoth's defeat, the world was left in a state of uncertainty. The First Age had ended, and the remnants of Morgoth's empire were scattered and leaderless. Sauron, in hiding, initially seemed to vanish from the historical record, but he was far from defeated. He had always been a master of deception and patience, and he knew that his time to rise would come again. Without Morgoth, Sauron's ambitions began to evolve. No longer content to simply serve as the right hand of another, Sauron began to see himself as the rightful ruler of Middle-earth. His early years in hiding were spent regrouping, amassing knowledge, and planning his next move. He was no longer merely Morgoth's lieutenant. He was now the Dark Lord in his own right. One of the key aspects of Sauron's rise to power was his ability to manipulate others. While Morgoth had ruled through brute force and terror, Sauron preferred more subtle methods. He was a master of deception, able to present himself as a figure of wisdom and authority, earning the trust of others only to betray them later. This cunning approach allowed Sauron to slowly rebuild his power without drawing the immediate attention of the Valar or the Elves. During the Second Age, Sauron's ambitions reached new heights. He sought to dominate Middle-earth through the forging of the Rings of Power. By manipulating the elves and using his knowledge of crafting, Sauron helped create the Great Rings, which were distributed to elves, dwarves, and men. But his true aim was the One Ring, a master ring that would give him control over all the others, and through them, the rulers of Middle-earth. Sauron's creation of the One Ring marked a significant turning point in his quest for power. With the ring, Sauron became the most powerful force in Middle-earth, surpassing even what Morgoth had once achieved. He ruled vast territories, commanded legions of orcs, and sought to enslave all of Middle-earth under his dominion. This period of his rule was marked by a shift in his priorities. While he had once served Morgoth, he was now fully invested in his own vision of conquest. However, despite Sauron's rise to power, there remained a lingering question. Did he still desire to release Morgoth from the void? Sauron had, after all, been Morgoth's most loyal servant for ages. But by the Second Age, Sauron was no longer the follower he once was. He had grown into a ruler in his own right, and it is possible that he no longer wished to serve anyone else, even Morgoth. The forging of the Rings of Power and Sauron's subsequent war against the elves demonstrated his desire for complete dominion over Middle-earth. Unlike Morgoth, whose primary goal had been destruction and corruption, Sauron sought to rule and control. This difference in their ambitions raises an important question. Would Sauron have wanted Morgoth's return, knowing that it could challenge his newfound authority? Sauron's ambitions were deeply personal by the time he established himself as the Dark Lord. Though he may have once revered Morgoth, his ultimate goal became the domination of Middle-earth through his own means. The creation of the One Ring was the clearest indication of this shift in his thinking. Sauron no longer needed to rely on another's power. He had crafted a tool that would allow him to control others directly. While it is true that Morgoth's return was prophesied in the distant future, Sauron seemed more focused on the present. His immediate concerns were the conquest of Middle-earth and the subjugation of its peoples. The idea of releasing Morgoth from the void may have seemed unnecessary to Sauron, as he now had the power to rule on his own. Additionally, releasing Morgoth could have disrupted the delicate balance of control that Sauron had built, potentially even undermining his position as the Dark Lord. Thus, by the Second Age, Sauron had evolved into a figure of independent ambition. While Morgoth's influence on him remained undeniable, Sauron had grown beyond mere servitude. He was no longer the loyal disciple he had once been, but rather a ruler who sought to impose his own order upon the world. In this light, the question of whether Sauron ever considered releasing Morgoth from the void becomes even more complex. Though his loyalty to Morgoth had once been unwavering, Sauron's desire for personal power may have ultimately outweighed any lingering devotion to his former master. In the vast mythology of Tolkien's Legendarium, there are whispers and hints about the return of Morgoth. a dark prophecy that casts a long shadow over the ages of Middle-earth. This prophecy speaks of the Dagor-Dagorath, the final battle at the end of the world, when Morgoth will break free from the void and wage one last war against the forces of good. For Sauron, the servant-turned-master, this prophecy may have held deep significance, shaping his decisions and fueling his ambitions in subtle ways. The prophecy of Morgoth's return is not as prominent as other tales in Tolkien's works, but it exists in some of the more obscure writings, like the Athrobeth Finrod Ar Andreth and early drafts of the Silmarillion. According to these legends, Morgoth's imprisonment in the void was not eternal. He would eventually find a way to escape, and when he did, the world would be plunged into a final cataclysmic conflict. The Valar, the elves, and the mortal races of men would unite against Morgoth's forces for one last stand, led by Erendil, the half-elven mariner who had once played a key role in Morgoth's defeat at the end of the First Age. This final conflict, the Dagor-Dagorath, would mark the end of Arda, the world itself, and perhaps its ultimate renewal. For Sauron, who had been Morgoth's greatest lieutenant during the First Age, the existence of such a prophecy might have been a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the return of Morgoth would signify the restoration of his old master's power, the completion of the dark vision they had once shared. But on the other hand, Sauron had by then grown into a power of his own, and the return of Morgoth would almost certainly challenge his dominion over Middle-earth. In the aftermath of Morgoth's defeat, Sauron must have been aware of the whispers and fears surrounding the potential for Morgoth's eventual escape from the void. Though the Valar had banished Morgoth beyond the world, the idea that such an entity could remain imprisoned forever might have seemed unlikely to those who understood the true nature of the Ainur. As a Maya, Sauron would have known the limits of the Valar's power. While they had the authority to banish Morgoth, they could not destroy him. Morgoth, like Sauron himself, was immortal, and his return was not beyond the realm of possibility. If Sauron believed in the prophecy of Morgoth's return, it could have shaped his actions in several ways. First, Sauron might have seen himself as the temporary steward of his master's dominion. In this view, Sauron's efforts to conquer Middle-earth could have been seen as part of a larger, long-term plan to prepare the world for Morgoth's eventual return. By establishing his own rule and consolidating power, Sauron may have believed that he was safeguarding Morgoth's legacy, ensuring that the world would be ready for the day when Morgoth broke free and resumed his conquest. However, the complex nature of Sauron's character suggests that his relationship with Morgoth and the prophecy of his return was not so simple. While Sauron had once served Morgoth with unwavering loyalty, his experiences after the First Age transformed him. By the time Sauron re-emerged as the Dark Lord of Middle-earth, he had become a force unto himself, with his own ambitions and his own vision of how to shape the world. Though Morgoth's teachings had influenced Sauron's path, the two figures had fundamentally different approaches to their quest for power. Morgoth, from the beginning, had been a being of destruction and chaos. His rebellion against the Valar and Eru Ilúvatar had been motivated by his desire to mar and corrupt the world, turning creation itself into a reflection of his own twisted desires. He sought not just to rule, but to break the very fabric of the world, to bend it to his will and remake it in his own image. Morgoth's rule was defined by chaos, ruin, and decay, and his dominion over Middle-earth during the First Age had been marked by endless war, destruction, and the suffering of the free peoples. Sauron, on the other hand, though shaped by Morgoth's influence, was more interested in control and order. He sought to dominate through manipulation, through subtlety and cunning, rather than through sheer brute force. Sauron's creation of the One Ring was a reflection of his desire to control, to bring all peoples under his will, and to impose a strict, rigid order on the world. Though both Morgoth and Sauron sought power, their methods and their ultimate goals were different. The prophecy of Morgoth's return would have represented a profound challenge to Sauron's vision. If Morgoth were to return, it would almost certainly mean a return to chaos, destruction, and the unmaking of the world itself. Sauron, who had spent millennia carefully crafting his own dominion, may have viewed this with trepidation. While he had once been Morgoth's servant, Sauron's desire for order and control had grown beyond Morgoth's vision of chaos. The return of his old master could have threatened everything Sauron had built. Moreover, by the time of the Second and Third Ages, Sauron had become the supreme dark power in Middle-earth. Though he had once served Morgoth, Sauron had by then surpassed his former master in many ways, especially in terms of influence over the hearts and minds of Middle-earth's inhabitants. Morgoth had ruled through fear and sheer force, but Sauron ruled through deception, manipulation, and the subtle corruption of those he sought to dominate. The One Ring itself was a symbol of this new form of power, a tool that allowed Sauron to bend the wills of others without the need for open conflict. In light of this, it's possible that Sauron, despite his loyalty to Morgoth in the past, no longer desired his master's return. By the time Sauron had established his own power base, he had little to gain from Morgoth's resurgence. If Morgoth were to return, Sauron's authority would almost certainly be diminished. He would once again be relegated to the role of a servant, forced to follow the will of a master who valued destruction over the careful control that Sauron so prized. At the same time, Sauron may have viewed the prophecy of Morgoth's return as inevitable. Even if he no longer desired to release Morgoth, he may have believed that his old master's return was fated. This belief could have shaped Sauron's actions in subtle ways. If Sauron believed that Morgoth would one day return and bring about the final destruction of the world, it might have influenced his desire to dominate Middle-earth as quickly and thoroughly as possible. Knowing that the world's days were numbered, Sauron may have felt a sense of urgency, a need to solidify his control before the inevitable end. Additionally, Sauron's relationship with the prophecy could have been one of fear as well as ambition. The idea that Morgoth would one day return could have haunted Sauron, reminding him that his own power was temporary. No matter how much Sauron accomplished, the return of Morgoth would ultimately overshadow everything. This looming threat might have driven Sauron to seek even greater control over Middle-earth, as if in defiance of the prophecy, hoping that by achieving total dominion, he could somehow stave off the return of his former master. Thus, the prophecy of Morgoth's return is a complex and multifaceted element of Sauron's story. On one level, it represents a continuation of the dark legacy that Sauron once served, a reminder of the ultimate power that Morgoth had wielded. But on another level, it represents a challenge to Sauron's own vision of control, a threat to the order and dominion that he had worked so hard to build. Whether Sauron ever actively sought to release Morgoth from the void remains a matter of speculation, but it's clear that the prophecy of Morgoth's return would have weighed heavily on his mind, shaping his actions and ambitions throughout the ages. By the time Sauron established himself as the Dark Lord of Middle-earth in the Second and Third Ages, he had risen to become one of the most powerful entities in the world. His ambition for dominion was singular, driven by his desire for complete control over all peoples and lands. Yet despite his rise, the question remains: would Sauron ever have considered releasing Morgoth his former master, from the void. While Sauron's loyalty to Morgoth was once unquestionable, his own pursuit of power raises doubt about whether he would have risked the return of his master. When examining Sauron's character, it's important to recognize his transformation after Morgoth's defeat at the end of the First Age. Initially, Sauron was utterly loyal to Morgoth, viewing him as the embodiment of ultimate power and authority. Sauron's service to Morgoth was not one of blind obedience, but of ideological alignment. Both shared a vision of reshaping the world according to their will, rejecting the authority of the Valar and Eru Ilúvatar. However, while Morgoth sought to destroy and corrupt all of creation, Sauron was more focused on the organization and subjugation of the world. For him, power lay in control and order, not merely in chaos and ruin. After Morgoth's imprisonment, Sauron had a choice. He could have repented and submitted to the judgment of the Valar, or he could continue to pursue his own path. His refusal to seek forgiveness shows that Sauron's ambitions had evolved beyond his servitude to Morgoth. This marked the beginning of Sauron's independence, a crucial turning point in his character. No longer would he be defined solely as Morgoth's lieutenant. Instead, he began to view himself as the rightful ruler of Middle-earth. The forging of the One Ring during the Second Age was perhaps the most telling sign of Sauron's growing desire for self-sufficiency and absolute authority. By creating the One Ring, Sauron ensured that he would have control over the other rings of power and, by extension, the rulers of the free peoples of Middle-earth. The ring was designed to be the ultimate tool of domination, a direct extension of Sauron's will. With the ring, Sauron could control the minds of others, bending them to his purposes without the need for overt force or conflict. This strategic move underscores how much Sauron's thinking had evolved. Whereas Morgoth had relied on raw power and fear to impose his will, Sauron sought to control through more subtle means, using manipulation and the corrupting power of the One Ring. In light of this, the idea of releasing Morgoth from the void becomes problematic for Sauron. Morgoth's return would have almost certainly disrupted the careful web of control that Sauron had spun. Morgoth, as the original Dark Lord, was a being of raw, destructive power. His presence would have introduced chaos into a world where Sauron was trying to impose order. While Sauron might have once revered Morgoth's strength by the time he established his own dominion, it's likely that he would have seen Morgoth's return as a threat to his carefully crafted empire. Another factor to consider is Sauron's pride. By the Second and Third Ages, Sauron had accumulated vast power and influence. He had created his own armies, subjugated vast swaths of Middle-earth, and ruled from the fortress of Barad-dûr. Sauron's sense of superiority would have grown with each conquest. Though he had once served Morgoth, Sauron may have come to believe that he had surpassed his former master in terms of strategy, cunning, and even influence over Middle-earth. Morgoth, after all, had been defeated and cast into the void. Despite his immense power, Morgoth had been unable to withstand the combined forces of the Valar and the Elves. Sauron, on the other hand, had managed to survive through multiple ages, adapting to changing circumstances and manipulating the free peoples of Middle-earth for centuries. In Sauron's mind, he might have believed that he had achieved what Morgoth never could, lasting dominion over Middle-earth. In this sense, Sauron's pride would have made him hesitant to bring Morgoth back. Why would he willingly return to the role of a servant when he had achieved so much on his own? Furthermore, Morgoth's return would have meant the reassertion of an older, more primal form of evil, one that was less interested in control and more in destruction. Morgoth's endgame had always been the unraveling of creation itself. He sought to corrupt and destroy the world, to twist it into something unrecognizable from what the Valar and Eru Ilúvatar had intended. Sauron, on the other hand, sought to dominate and rule. His version of evil was not about the annihilation of the world, but about its subjugation. Sauron wanted Middle-earth to thrive under his control, not be reduced to ruins. Morgoth's return, with his more chaotic approach, would have jeopardized everything Sauron had built. There's also the practical question of how Sauron could have even gone about releasing Morgoth from the Void. The Void, or the timeless halls beyond the circles of the world, is a realm outside of Ea, the physical universe created by Eru Ilúvatar. Morgoth was banished there by the combined power of the Valar, and it's implied that only Eru himself could release him. Even if Sauron had the desire to bring Morgoth back, he would likely have been powerless to do so. This limitation of power may have been another factor in Sauron's calculations. Knowing that he could not release Morgoth, Sauron may have focused instead on consolidating his own power, knowing that Morgoth's return was beyond his control. That said, there may have been a lingering part of Sauron that still felt bound to his former master. Despite his pride and his desire for self-rule, Sauron had once been a devoted servant of Morgoth, and it's possible that a part of him still longed for the return of the original Dark Lord. Sauron's identity had been shaped by Morgoth's influence, and even in his later years, there may have been a sense of unfinished business. The prophecy of Morgoth's return, as outlined in some of Tolkien's early writings, may have been a source of both hope and fear for Sauron. On one hand, the return of Morgoth would mean the fulfillment of a dark destiny, the ultimate triumph of evil over good. But on the other hand, it would mean that Sauron's own reign would come to an end, as he would once again be forced into the role of a servant. Ultimately, it's difficult to say whether Sauron ever seriously considered releasing Morgoth from the Void. His ambitions had evolved so much by the Second and Third Ages that Morgoth's return might have seemed unnecessary, even dangerous to him. Sauron had grown into a power of his own, independent from the shadow of his former master. He had crafted his own tools of domination, built his own empire, and become the supreme dark force in Middle-earth. Releasing Morgoth would have introduced a wild, uncontrollable element into his carefully constructed dominion. In the end, Sauron's desire for control, order, and self-rule may have outweighed any lingering loyalty he felt toward Morgoth. Thus, while Sauron's past as Morgoth's lieutenant might suggest that he once desired his master's return, his evolution into a ruler in his own right complicates this narrative. Sauron had become his own Dark Lord, with his own unique vision of how the world should be ruled. Morgoth's return would have likely disrupted this vision, challenging Sauron's authority and introducing chaos where Sauron sought order. For these reasons, it's likely that by the time of his reign in Middle-earth, Sauron had little interest in releasing Morgoth from the Void. Instead, he was focused on his own path to absolute domination, one that no longer required the presence of his former master.